Welcome. In this video we're going to be doing something different. We're going to be going over the world boss and how to build teams for them. The world bosses are different each time, so you're going to have to pay attention to them as well as the two watchers on the side, to what they do. But on this video we're just going to be going over how to look at that, assess it, and then build teams around it or pick the proper Elunes for each one, and things that you can consider and what I do in my process for doing it. So first we're going to go ahead and take a look at the different bosses for this one and what we need to bring into each one so we can get an idea of it in our head, so when we start to build the teams we have an idea already what we're going to need at each one. So let's go ahead and take a look at the main boss first. This one is the one that you're going to want to make sure you have the best team for, because it's the one where if this team dies, the run ends. So let's take a look. For this one, the main thing you want to pay attention to is the strategy and the characteristics section. The recommended one can give you some options here for the recommended Elunes. So let's go ahead and take a look and see what it says for the characteristics. In this case, this is the Guardian Balance. It reduces healing by 50% to all of your team. This is just done as a passive thing, so any healers that you bring in, it will be reduced by 50%. This can be significant and it depends on the healers that you bring, but bringing in things like barriers can offset that, as that those are not reduced as much and you still have a good barrier that has to be gotten through first before they do actual damage. So in this case, things like Freya are very good for this team because she not only provides a passive heal when you're attacked, but she also provides very high amount of healing as well as barriers to help protect your team, making Freya a pretty good one for this. As you can see on this one, they do give some other options for stuff like Stella or Teresa, but for me I think I'm going to go with my Freya for this one, as she does provide lots of barriers. Alright, let's look and see what we need on the Watcher. On this one is going to be the groggy gauge increase when they're attacked with something that does a spell status effect. So we're going to have to go over the different Elunes to look for spell status Elunes. The recommended Elune list isn't always so great, as a lot of the Elunes that they recommend in here have a spell status that they can do, but sometimes they're like on the 5% chance if you have them on a skill gem set, or they're just a really low chance to proc, and I don't want to look for things like that. I want to look for things that have a higher chance of proccing or more likely to do it, or something that I can spam. Even if it's not so much of a hard hitting damage dealer, I want to be able to spam that spell status effect, because I want to get that groggy gauge increased more than I want to be able to do the damage. That way I can focus my damage dealers on the Guardian of Balance, which is where most of the damage will be dealt anyway. This way I don't have to spread the damage across to 3, I can just increase groggy states on the 2 sides and then push for that damage on the Guardian of Balance by putting in a tanky team with high damage. So for this one, when we do it, we'll be going over and looking in at the different Elunes for spell status effects. On the Destiny one, which is going to be the second one, this one increases groggy by physical status effects. So for this one, we're going to be wanting to look at things that constantly apply physical status effects and that do it all the time, as you don't have to worry about tolerance stacks. This means it's just anything that does physical status effects that you can do on a consistent basis is going to be what you want to do. So let's go ahead and take a look. This one should be very easy to do for most people. However, the spell one might be a little bit more difficult, so we're going to look at that one and go over some options for it. As far as the Guardian of Balance for this one we're just going to be looking for anything with high damage, somewhat tankiness, so that way they can survive, and then we'll be bringing in my case, I'll be bringing in a Freya just for that extra shield, for those barriers that she provides for damage reduction, as well as bringing in my Weiwei here because this is where I want to do the most damage. So let's go ahead and start building those teams. So for the first team, let's go ahead and go Guardian of Balance. I typically go with just a front line one here. So 1 front tank and then 4 in the back. The accuracy isn't too important. I just usually want to be able to focus on healing 1 tank. So in this case, I need something with good physical defense, and that's mostly because for this one, the boss will deal physical damage. So anything with high physical defense is going to be helpful. So in this case, normally I would go with a tank or some type of good tank like the Fahrenheit if you have it. You could go with other things. For example, you could go with Rachel, you could go with May here, you could go with the Rachel here, you could go with the May here, you can go with the Fahrenheit, you can go with any of those if you want. If you don't have those, some other good physical tanks would be things like the Nasser here, very good physical tank. Other good physical tanks, of course, is the Sid Rainer or the Owen. Those are also very good physical tanks as they provide good physical defense. Also things here like Thanatos also provide good physical defense. So if you don't have some of the legendary tanks, those are probably going to be some of your other better physical tanks. I wouldn't go too much for in these cases. I wouldn't use something like this. I wouldn't use evasion tanks because like this is going to be focused more on magic defense, so I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't go with Baekwon Jo because again he's more of an evasion tank, so he's typically not going to have good base stats. But for this one, since I want to be able to do as much damage as possible and I'm just looking for something with tanky stats, I'm just going to go ahead and bring the Artemil in here. As he doesn't do any debuffs, I don't need him on the other 2 teams. Now I could opt to go with him on the other 2 teams, and it's something you need to keep in mind. If I go with him on the other 2 teams, he'll be not only as a tank for that team, but he can also provide support healing because every time he attacks or every time the boss attacks, he will be counterattacking and he will providing additional heal as damage too. So that's not too bad for this one. But we'll keep him in mind. We might change him out on the other teams just depending on what we go with. But probably in my case, I'm going to go ahead and keep him here just for that extra damage plus the high physical defense. So in my case on my Artemil here, you can see that his base defense is 21.6k, so he has very high physical defense, as well as HP being at 111k. This makes him quite tanky for me in my case, so he can do well as a frontline tank. Plus the healing that he receives is increased by 20%, even though it's decreased by 50%. It's still a 10% increase when you think of it that way. So as far as my healer goes, I'm going to go with my Freya, as my Freya does provide very good healing, but she is also built purposely to have high physical defense, as I use her as a tank against Artemils for PvP situations like air battles or whatever. I can use her there. She has good HP at 104k, but 15.4k physical defense, so she is going to be somewhat tanky to physical damage. But in this case, for this boss, because of the reduced healing, she does have very good options. She has a heal on skill 1, but I'm mostly going to be using her for her second skill, the Guardian Spirit, because I want to be able to just spam that, because I want the healing from it, but I also want that constant barrier that it puts up, because the barrier gets put up based on her attack, so it's always going to be a very strong barrier, and it's going to be hard for that boss to nuke down. So this way I'm going to go with her, so that way I have that very strong barrier plus very good healing. Also for this one, since it is the main one, this is the place where I want to go ahead and use my Weiwei, because the Weiwei is going to give me those defensive buffs as well as the massive attack buff, and that's what I want to do. So for this team here, I'm going with basically a tank, a healer, a support for Weiwei. In this case, my tank is Artemil, which is another support, but I'm going to set him to use only skill 1 when we get into the skill queuing stuff. So for this one, I want the Weiwei to buff attack and defense, but I also want to be able to keep some defensive up with barriers up with the Freya. Now, as far as my damage dealers go, I'm going to want to focus on anything that does really high damage. So in this case, one of my better damage dealers, especially for bosses, is going to be this one, which is the Caroline. So I like using her as a damage dealer, even though she takes an additional turn to use her skill 2. I do like using it because it is very good damage. Now I can just let her go and don't have to set any special skills for her later, because she'll just use it when it's in rotation anyway, and she does do a lot of damage, so it's not too bad to use her for that. She does have that high damage in that case, and if I didn't run with her, I would probably use Arslan, but I want to use the Arslan later because he is a good physical damage dealer, but he's also going to be doing well for my other team where I'm going to need that physical debuffs. This way he's doing good damage over there, plus applying physical debuffs all the time. So I'm going to want him over there. So for my other damage dealer for here, again, I'm going to want something with high damage. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and go with this one, my Congrim, because my Congrim does do good damage because his skill 3, it can't one-shot the boss, but when it can't one-shot, it does more damage. So therefore, I'm going to be doing a lot of damage to the boss. Now, the drawback to using Caroline in this situation is that she has no defenses. And that's important because if the boss is hitting you, she can die. Again, the best reason to bring Freya, as she has that shield. Because even when Weiwei buffs, Caroline doesn't get that buff. She doesn't get a defense buff. She stays at 0 physical and magic defense because her passive converts that just into nothingness. So it goes away and it's changed into an attack buff instead, making her hit even harder. So in this case, the Freya is going to be the thing that's going to be keeping her alive by putting up a constant shield or constant barrier for her and healing her. So let's go ahead and move on. Before we do the skill queuing, we'll go and do that last. Okay, moving on. The next one, which is the Watcher. This is the one, the Providence Watcher. This is going to be the one that does the requirement for the spell effects. So again, front, I just want a single tank in the front. If you don't remember what it is, you can click the little magnifying glass here and it'll tell you what it is. Again, to remind you, in this case, again, spell status effects. So we're going to be looking for things that do spell status effects. So what do we have for a tank that can do spell status effects? Let's take a look. Does Mei do spell status effects? Her main thing that she's going to do, I'm going to be looking, she does a physical bleed, a curse effect, but what does she have here? Oh, look, she has a spell status effect if she's missed. So this doesn't confuse. This means every time the boss attacks, it'll be inflicted with a spell status effect. That's what we want. That means I can use her as a tank because every time the boss attacks, they get inflicted with a spell status effect. Also, Mei protects the lowest HP, which means I can run a low HP or a weak type Elune, and then she's going to take all the damage for him anyway. And I can just keep her spamming her skill too, so she doesn't have to do anything else. She never has to attack. So she's going to be my go-to tank. Now, if I didn't have her and I needed something else that did a spell status effect, you could go with other things. Like, let's take a look here at the Inmei, and the Inmei does a spell status effect on his special skill. It's a banish effect, but it doesn't really do anything to these bosses as it just applies the effect and it counts towards the groggy state. So because of that, you can use him and keep applying that spell status effect, and it's just a way for him to do that, as he does provide that. If you're looking for other tanks that do spell status effects, you're going to have a hard time finding them because there really aren't any. So that is something to keep in mind. Inmei is probably going to be your next best option if you're wanting to do that. Now, if you can't find something and you don't have an Inmei built to do this and you don't have a Mei, you can always go with just a tank that doesn't do any spell statuses at all. In other words, just a tank that's just there to tank. So you could go with virtually any tank in this position, so that way you can just have a tank there. So for me, I'm going to go ahead and put my Mei because she'll do it passively, and I can just let her stay alive by healing herself. So, what else do we have that does spell status effects? Well, let's take a look at Reaper. I know on the Reaper, the skill 1 is a curse effect. The skill 2 is a bleed for a physical effect, and then the last skills are nothing. So she's not going to be very useful here at all, as she only does physical effects, and that's about it. So she's not very useful. But if you're looking for something to do curse effects, set her to use skill 1. She'll do tons of them. So while we're here, let's go ahead and take a look at anything. We're going to be looking for spell effects. So let's take a look. Mikazuki has, let's see, she does a physical effect, a nature effect, a curse effect. Not exactly that great. She does have the chance to do a spell effect as a passive, which can be good, but let's see if we have something else instead. It is on her passive, so that is very helpful, but that's something if they evade, or if the evasion takes place. So it's very dependent on an evasion mechanic, so it's not something you're going to want to rely on. So let's go ahead and take a look for something else that does a spell effect. Probably one of the more common things that you're going to be able to look for, let me see if I can find it real quick. Does Reina do any? She does the spell effect for Restrain. That's exactly what we wanted. That skill doesn't do any damage though, but that's fine. We just want to pop that groggy gauge up as fast as possible. So Reina is going to be a good option because it's only 2 souls and we can spam it constantly. So let's go ahead and put Reina in there as our second spell applying debuffer. So let's go ahead and take a look, and do we have anything else that does spells? Well, let's go ahead and take a look at Lilith. What does Lilith do? This one is a weaken effect. Oh, another spell effect for charm. This is good. Now this takes effect against male things, but it also will do it if it's attacking a male enemy. It'll automatically do, if they're attacked by a male enemy, it'll apply a spell effect. If they're attacking a male effect, it'll apply a spell effect. These bosses should be males. I don't think they're classified as female, so it should be male for this one. So we can go ahead and go with Lilith for this one too, and use her as another debuffer for spell effects. So now that we've got a bunch of spell effect applying things here, we're going to need something for protection. So what do we want to do now? We're going to need a good healer, and we're going to need some type of good healing, mainly for the back 2, because the Mei will protect one but not both. So we're going to need protection, and we're going to want some type of damage mitigation. So for that, I'm going to go ahead and go with Guyan here, because he provides nice buffs from his runes that he applies. So that's going to give me some really good effects there. What else do we have that can do it? Now you could possibly use her. If you have the Elucia, you could use her. She does do a curse effect. It's not a spell effect, and she does do a nature effect, but no spell effects. But she is still a decent healer, as she heals on skill 1 and skill 2. She can heal. Now if she does have to heal with her skill 2, it's going to sleep, something you're probably not going to want. So some type of AoE healer. If you have Trent, you could go with Trent, so that way you have a good AoE healer. But if you don't have Trent, some other good healers to go with would be Elune, because she provides constant healing as well as a little damage. So we're going to go, in this case for me, I'm going to go with her to provide that healing in this case. So let's go ahead and move on to the next one now, the last one, Destiny Watcher. Moving on to Destiny Watcher, again I'm going to be changing up my thing. I like using this one, so this is just the one I'm going to use. Now for this one, I'm going to need physical status effects. Well, who does good physical status effects? So I'm going to want something tanky, but that does physical status effects. Now Fahrenheit does do it based on speed, so he can apply that physical status effect. But if you don't have a Fahrenheit and you're looking for other tanks to do it, Baekwon does have a provoke on his skill 2 that does do a physical effect that provokes, and if you level that one up, it can be pretty good. So let's see. Here I could level it up a little bit to 5, but the provoke is still 1 turn, so I'd wait until I got it to 6, so the provoke would be 2 turns. But you could go with him, as the skill is a pretty spammable skill. You can keep the target provoked pretty well with him. It's a similar case with Nasser. He does have a provoke as a passive, plus he does have it as an AoE skill too. Provoke as a physical effect, so he can do that there. So you can use him as a tank for physical provokes. The same thing here if you go with right, I select them, let me unselect them. If I go with, say, the Thanatos here, again, the Thanatos has a provoke physical effect on his skill 3, so you can use him for provoking. Unfortunately, since this is a skill 3, it's not going to be spammable for him, so that is kind of a drawback to it. So for other tanks, you can, let me see, what was the other one? This one too, the Skady. Again, he has nature effects, but his provoke, his physical effect, is on his skill 3 again, which is his ultimate skill, so it's going to have a cooldown, so he won't be able to provide it all the time, so he's not going to be able to provoke very often. Now that's kind of basically the problem that you're going to be running into with most of your tanks that do a provoke, is that they're not going to be able to just use it all the time. So don't worry too much if you don't have anything that does provoke or physical effects. Just go with whatever the best tank that you have for this job. That's fine. You don't have to have your tank do the debuffs or the groggy state thing for this, as long as you have some other ones to do it. Now typically you're going to be able to easily find things that do physical effects as DPS or as debuffers, so don't worry too much about it for your tank. So for me in this case, I'm just going to go ahead and throw my Fahrenheit up there as the tank. It doesn't really matter, but for me I'm just going to use him, but you can use virtually anything as long as you have a healer. So for me, I know I'm going to need a healer for this one. Now I don't necessarily need the healer to do physical effects or anything. It really doesn't matter. I could, not that Trent, I could go ahead and use Trent for this one, as he does do a heal, and I can just tell him to basically spam the heal all the time. So that way they're, with the skill 2 heal, don't use skill 3. You don't want to be cleansing off your buffs all the time. So I'm going to have him do that. The other thing that you can do, you're going to want some type of damage mitigation or something to help you. So you can use something like her, the Majed, or you can use Karu or something to help do that if you need. But basically, you're going to want some type of support to provide something that reduces the damage you take, or you're going to need something somewhat tanky to help deal with that. So you could go with a double healer setup. So in this case, I could go with, say, a Trent plus something else, or if you don't have a Trent and you don't have a good AoE healer, you can go with just basically any other healer. So if you don't have that and you don't have a way for doing damage reduction, you can instead go with Fabian here, or Elune if you have her and you weren't using her somewhere else. You could use her. Other AoE healers that you could go with, let's see, what else did I have built up? You could do Springhua, as she does provide an AoE heal, so you can use her too. Plus she does have she has a weaken effect. She absorbs weaken effects, and she does have a curse effect, sleep, when she heals. So she can be good if you need a curse effect. Keep that in mind. But in my case for this, I'm going to want to go with something that just helps provide either damage mitigation or something to that effect. So I'm going to go probably... let's see, do I want tanky? What am I going to do? Let's go ahead and go with my physical damage dealers first, or my physical effect people first. So I'm going to go here with, let's see, we're going to do this one and this one. So I'm going to have McCarthy and Arslan in here because they provide physical stuff all the time. If you look at McCarthy, his skills, he does weaken effects, I think, but he does have a physical effect, stun on his skill 3, so I can use him if I want the damage. A lot of people will have McCarthy as he is a pretty common legendary. If you've been farming a lot for whatever you can, Nika would be a really good one to bring, because you can set her to just use her skill 2, which is a physical stun effect all the time, and you can just keep bringing that and just have her spam skill 2 over and over and over again. So that way it's just constantly doing a little bit of damage. The Arslan does it as a passive, so he's always good. The other thing that you can use, you can just set it to use skill 1, and you can bring in the Crucio here, as his skill 1 has a chance to stun, which is a physical effect on skill 1. You can just have him spam skill 1 all you want. So if you have him and you don't know what to do with him, here's a use for him. He also does provide a spell effect, so if I wanted someone with an extra spell effect, he does provide it on his skill 3, his ultimate skill, and he does provide a bleeding too, so you can use him for that. So, but you just want to be careful, because if he uses the second skill, he'll reduce his HP a lot, so if you don't have a way to heal him, then he might die pretty quick when you're fighting the boss, and then he's just useless. I can also use, in this case, for physical effect, I can go with the Reaper here, because in this case the Reaper has the bleeding effect on her second skill, and I can just have it spam that. I can just tell it to spam the bleeding all the time, so that way it's constantly doing physical stuff and it's constantly doing it, and that way I can do that. So for me, I'm going to go ahead and go with the Reaper over the Nika, because I want that extra damage too from it. So now what do I want to use for offsetting or healing? In this case, let's go ahead and go with something fun. We'll go with her, just for that extra bit there, just to provide buffs or whatever. She's not going to be able to res, but she can provide buffs, because her third skill here does provide an enhanced buff that increases resistances, but you know, she does do damage, but it's mostly her Heartbeat's blessing that does increased damage, reduced damage, and then increased healing. So if she's doing that, she can help provide buffs to your team to keep them alive, reduce damage that they take, things like that. She is decent for doing that. If you don't have her and you're looking for something else to help reduce damage, then the Miho is a good option, because she increases evasion. So you can essentially evade a lot of damage by just having her spam that. So she would be pretty good to use if you're looking for something too. So let's go ahead and go to the skill queue section now. For this one, I'm going to go ahead and start with the Guardian Balance. For this, I select my Artemis on the top. I want him to just use skill 1, so I click that one. In other words, it'll prioritize that, meaning it'll use that if it's available, which it should always be available, which means he'll always use it, and he won't use the other 2 skills. So he's not wasting souls, and it really doesn't matter. So for the Wei, I want her to focus on buffing attack all the time. Now once that's on cooldown, the next turn she'll buff with her special skill, and she'll keep doing that too as long as it's available, and then using the third one if she just doesn't have souls. For the Freya, I want to use Guardian Spirit all the time, because that's just the one I want. This way, if it's available and she has the souls, she can use it. This way she won't be using her Eternal Blessings, because if she can use it, then she can use Guardian Spirit, and Guardian Spirit will take precedence, because that's the one I want her to focus on. As far as the Congrim, I want him to use his ultimate skill whenever it's available, so I'm setting that as a priority, because I want him to use it all the time. Once the boss has 3 hits on it in the Mark of Death, this skill becomes a 0 cost skill, which means when it's spammed, it doesn't take 6 souls anymore. It's just 0 cost, does a lot of damage. For the last one, for the Caroline, I can focus the damage with her skill 2 for the 4 soul cost, or I can go ahead and go with telling her to use Devastation, or just letting her do whatever she wants. But I'd rather just try to focus on the skill 2, just because this does so much damage. I would rather just her use that all the time. As you can see, mine, I have a gear on her that makes it up to level 7, making it deal 2690 plus 411% of her attack as magic damage. You buff that up with the Way buff plus her other passives that convert Way buffs, and it just makes her damage increasingly high. So I want that skill to use all the time because it's really high damage. So Providence Washer, this is the one that does the spell. So for this, the May, I just want her to spam the second skill all the time, because I just want her to evade stuff so her debuff goes off. Now for this one, for the Gaian, I want him to keep everybody buffs, so I want him to prioritize his buffs to make sure everybody has attack, defense buffs, anything that they can give, plus it also acts as a heal. For her now, for my Lilith, this one, I want the spell effect, so I'm going to tell it to use the ultimate skill as much as possible because it is a spell effect. For this one, for Yoon, I want her to use her main big heal that also provides a heal over time to everybody, so that way there's constant healing. She'll prioritize that. If it's not, that means she'll use it even if they're not low HP. She'll constantly use it when it's available. When it's not available and they don't need healing, then she'll use skill 1, which also heals. But I want to force her to use this skill as much as possible, so that way it keeps everybody topped off. Now for the Reyna, I want her to just spam this one. I don't care if she does damage, I just want her to spam this for the spell effect, so that way it's constantly working up that groggy state. Destiny Watcher, for this one, I only need him to, he can spam all of them to reduce damage, so I can have him set to just use his Sacrificial Barrier whenever it's off cooldown, so that way he protects everybody, and that way he absorbs all the damage, so that's fine. I could use him just set nothing and he'll do whatever is needed. For this case, I don't want him using his skill 3 because I don't want him to remove any buffs. So I want him to just use his skill 2 for the AoE heal whenever he can, or attack or heal with the skill 1. I don't want him to use the last skill, so that way by prioritizing the second one, he won't use the ultimate skill, which means he won't be removing everybody's effects. For the Arslan, this does physical effects pretty much all the time because of how his passives work, so I don't have to prioritize the physical paralysis effect from the Fierce Cry, so I can tell him to focus on Extinction Strike just to do damage. As far as her, I want her to go ahead and do this one to increase, this one, the Harvey's Blessing, because I want her to buff everybody all the time, plus take lower souls, because I want those souls for other things. So for this one, I want to go ahead and just tell her to spam this one. I don't need to use the death one because they're immune to instant kill. I know that. She just reduces the soul cost by 2. Whoop-de-doo. It doesn't do much. I want her to land those physical effects, which is the bleed, which is on the second skill. So I just want her to spam that. If she has souls, use that, so that way it's applying those bleed effects to knock up that groggy state. So anyway, that's going to be my builds for this team. So those are going to be my teams for this World Boss iteration. So for here, I can we'll just go ahead and pick just whoever is on the top of my list for friends, and we'll go ahead and enter the battle, and that'll be the start of this season, and we'll see how this team goes. This is pretty much going to be it though for the video. I'm just going to let this play out so you can see how the team is working out and what it's doing, and you can watch what it's doing and why it's doing it based on what we told it to do, and you can see everybody's health meters at the bottom. But we're not going to be going over anything else after this goes through. I'm just going to let it go through. Whatever points I get, whatever score I get, that's going to be what I end up with for the World Boss, and I'm just going to spam it for the 10 runs that I do and get my points that way. I build the team one time, I don't try to adjust, tweak, or anything. I'm not that concerned with it. If I do good, great. If I don't do that as well as I want, oh well, maybe next time. Some bosses are better for me than others. But in this case, I'm just going to go ahead and let this one go. If you want to watch it, you can. Otherwise, once this is over, the video is going to end. So if you want to see how the team does, go ahead and finish out this video. If not, thanks for watching, and if you have any questions or comments, leave them below and I'll answer them as soon as I can. Thank you. If you made it this far, thanks again for watching. Hopefully it was helpful to you or gave you some ideas or what to do and how to build your teams or what to look for and kind of what process to go through when you're doing it. Thanks again and have a good one.